Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Shatane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakaptarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Right, yes, so chapter 15, the yoga of the Supreme Person, Purushottam Yoga. So, well, of course we're in the last, major section of the whole Bhagavad Gita. In the 13th chapter, we heard about the entanglement of the conditioned soul in terms of the association with Prakriti, the material nature, in the broader sense. Then in the 14th chapter, that same subject matter was analyzed in more detail, specifically in terms of the three modes and different features and different effects and different perspectives on the three modes. Very interesting. So here, at least in the beginning of this 15th chapter, Lord Krishna is going to continue the same theme of the entanglement of the conditioned soul. At least, like I said, in the beginning, it's just the first few verses actually. The entanglement of the conditioned soul in the material nature, as according to the concept of this world being something like a banyan tree, or actually an inverted, upside down banyan tree. Yes, which is connected with another banyan tree, which is the right way up. Yeah. So anyway, we'll get into that right now, but that's the idea. Again, it's the material world. What's the material world? What's it all about? And described in those terms, very interesting terms. And then he goes into more detail, much more detail, about how to get out of the material world through the process of devotional service, very specifically dedicating one's life to service to the Supreme Person, Purushottama Yoga. So, so in other words, these chapters, at least so far, including this one, they're not just sort of like just independent units separate from each other. It's all connected. It's all connected. Yes, so the point is, or a point is, that these understandings have to be as complete as possible, particularly how to get out. We've heard it expressed more just at the end of the 13th chapter. You just analyze. how I am not part of the material nature. But just in those simple terms, there's me, there's material nature, and I'm not part of the material nature. But now in the 14th chapter we've heard that how I'm entangled in the three modes. So it's not just I just step out of the material nature. There's a process of extrication, removing oneself in terms of whatever specific ways I'm entangled in the modes of material nature. And through devotional service, at the end, like verse 26 of the 14th chapter, it's a very famous verse about engaging in full devotional service and then coming to the level of Brahman immediately. But, there wasn't so much detail. It was more than anything just that one verse. Yeah. So here we're going to get more clarity. Yes. Yes. How one's entangled and how through devotional service one can become a pure devotee. And knowledge of one's position in the modes is important because the spiritual master and you, just yourself, your position has to be understood in this world so that you could say a customized program could be made for you. How to not just sort of sidestep, dodge the modes, but how you can engage in devotional service in particular ways. Because some activities in devotional service will help one deal, for example, more with passion, but they might not be so relevant for someone who's more in goodness, or maybe in ignorance also. So like this, Krishna consciousness is very personal. We are personalists. And ultimately, not that it always happens, but at least the spiritual master may sort of customize a program for you, for your engagement in devotional service, which may be quite different from the program of someone else. Someone else, he may emphasize and even insist that you must preach. And someone else, he may emphasize that you must, for example, worship the deities. You must do that. So, customization under the supervision of the spiritual master, but even if it's not like exactly, directly, personally organized by the spiritual master, at least in the company of devotees, intelligent devotees, experienced devotees, who understand the process, who understand you. So in ways like this, if not directly under the direction of the spiritual master personally, at least under the direction of authorities, senior devotees, who know the process, know you, and know how to engage you. Yeah, so this is all important. Okay, so the idea then, just to recap my little introduction, the idea here is that one should understand one's entanglement in the material world and then free oneself by surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yes, and really becoming absorbed in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore the title, the Yoga of the Supreme Person, or Purushottam Yoga. Okay, well, just a little interesting point before we actually begin. In the first verse, Lord Krishna makes the point that if one understands the entanglement of the jiva, one understands the Vedas. And so he's introducing the subject of the Vedas. There has been a little mention by name, little bit here and there so far. But now in this chapter, we're going to get more of a focus on the Vedas as authority, as real sources of information and knowledge about progressing spiritually, getting out of this world, becoming a pure devotee. Yeah, so at the end of the chapter, Lord Krishna, and in a few places, Lord Krishna is going to talk about the Vedas, beginning with right at the beginning. All right, so here we go. So now, sections. There are 4. Actually, there's only 20 verses, along with whatever, 1 or 2 other chapters. These are the shortest chapters in Bhagavad Gita, 20 verses. Which one was it? Oh, the one, chapter 12. Chapter 12 also had 20 verses. Yeah. All right, now the sections then, 4 sections. First section from verse 1 to verse 5, which is describing the material world as a reflected banyan tree, and basically emphasizing the need to become detached from it. Well, actually, it's even more than that. Emphasizing the need to become detached from it through Purushottam Yoga, through surrendering to the Supreme Lord in devotional service. It's very specifically pointed out. So that's verses 1 to 5. Then verses 6 to 11, the subject matter is transmigrations, the science of the transmigration of the soul. Then, so that's verse 6 to verse 11. Then from verse 12 to verse 15, Krishna's position as the maintainer. Yeah. And then the 4th section, verse 16 to verse 20, and this we call Bhagavad Gita in 3 verses. The 3 shloka Bhagavad Gita, summarizing the Vedas and Vedanta. You know, we already summarized Bhagavad Gita in chapter 10, verses 8 to 11. Chatu Shloki Bhagavad Gita. This is now Tri Shloki Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, and it's not only 3 sloka Bhagavad Gita, it's summarizing the Vedas and the Vedanta. Right, devotees. let us go into the first section, verse 1 to verse 5, the material world as a reflected banyan tree, and the need to become detached from it through pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord. That's how I would put it personally. I didn't actually make up these section headings. Anyway, it's okay. Right, so Srila Prabhupada explains in the beginning of the purport to the first verse. Prabhupada says, after the discussion of the importance of Bhakti Yoga, one may question, what about the Vedas? It is explained in this chapter that the purpose of Vedic study is to understand Krishna. Therefore, one who is in Krishna consciousness, who's engaged in devotional service, already knows the Vedas. That's Srila Prabhupada. That's the first paragraph of the purport. Okay. So let's read verse. Well, the whole section is verses 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So let's just read through, as usual, all those 5 verses. Verse 1, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. So, okay, now connecting up with the Vedas, it's an important point. The authoritativeness of Vedic knowledge. Verse 2. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the 3 modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruit of actions of human society. So describing the tree, at least certain parts of it. And now verses 3 and 4, Prabhupada has put together. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, now listen to this, devotees, just catch this. Thereafter, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began, and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. And verse 5, those who are free from false prestige, illusion and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. Oh, Krishna, Krishna. Yeah. So that's pretty specific, pointing to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, surrendering to Him, and strongly situated in knowledge, rendering devotional service to Him. All right, so let's go back to verse 1. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas." Okay. So I can just mention there's a lecture, at least one, by Srila Prabhupada on this verse. And there Srila Prabhupada says, listen to this, one who understands what is the constitution of this material world, how it is working, what we are, why we have come here, why we are struggling hard for existence, what is our duty, how to get out of this entanglement. That is Vedic knowledge. Not only to get out of this material entanglement, but to be engaged in devotional service. Because simply to get out is not the final business. Yeah, so okay, anyway, here again we see first paragraph, what about the Vedas, you know. And so as we go on, particularly actually in verse 15, which we'll get to after a couple of nights or something, there it's made, the point is made very clearly that what are the Vedas, what's the goal, what's the idea? And the idea is to understand Krishna and engage in his devotional service. That's the actual idea. Therefore, one who's already in Krishna consciousness, engaged in devotional service, Prabhupada says, already knows the Vedas. Yes. They already know. Just as, there are statements, there's in the fourth canto, there's statements, a few statements, that anyone who is engaged in devotional service, they have performed all the Vedic rituals and ceremonies and followed all the rules and regulations and maintained all the standards and all these things. Because if they had not done all those things, studied all the scriptures, if they had not done all those things, they wouldn't have it within them to take up devotional service. Or even, particularly, the one famous verse is, anyone who's chanting the holy names, they must have done all these things. Otherwise, they couldn't be chanting the holy names regularly. They couldn't do it. It's not possible. Right. So we carry on into the second paragraph. And in the second paragraph, the main roots are described. And Prabhupada says, the tree's roots grow upward because they begin from where Brahma is located, topmost planet, Brahma Loka. And Prabhupada makes the point, if you can understand this tree, the reflected tree, then, Prabhupada says, right at the end of the second paragraph, if one can understand this indestructible tree of illusion, then one can get out of it. But otherwise, the way Prabhupada's explaining things in the second paragraph is such that, he's comparing it to the banyan tree. And for those who are on the material level, there's no end to it. It just goes on and on and on and on. And more branches and more twigs, and then some aerial roots coming down, and then more big branches coming from there. And the problem is, Prabhupada explains here, that if you can't develop, if you're attached to the tree, you can't be liberated. You can't get out. So the Vedic hymns are the leaves. Yeah. And so if we can understand it, we can get out of it. Then let's see now, paragraph 3. Prabhupada explains an important point right from the beginning of the third paragraph. This process of extrication should be understood. In the previous chapters, it's been explained that there are many processes by which to get out of the material entanglement. And up to the 13th chapter, we've seen that devotional service to the Supreme Lord is the best way. Now, the basic principle of devotional service, well, it's actually twofold. Detachment from material life and attachment to the transcendental service of the Lord. In other words, these things are not exactly two separate things. They're a package, like heads and tails of a coin. You can't have the heads and leave the tails. They're one unit. So Krishna consciousness, devotional service is like that. That the essence of it is the devotional service, and then from that the detachment comes naturally. At least if you're doing your devotional service nicely. So the process of breaking attachment to the material world is discussed in the beginning of this chapter. So also in the third paragraph, the fruits are mentioned. The fruits. The fruits were not actually mentioned in the verse, at least not mentioned in the verse, but anyway, here there's mention. Here there's mention at the end of the third paragraph. The fruits represent the results of the living entity's activities, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. And then in the fourth paragraph, Prabhupada brings up a very important point, that we don't have experience in this world of a tree which has its roots going up and its branches going down. I don't think we really have experience of such a tree. Branches down, roots up. So, but now, you can find such a tree. You can find such a tree which has its branches down and roots up. Where will you find this? This is now, we're in the 4th paragraph. That we will find this tree beside a reservoir of water. Yeah. And Prabhupada explains, it's a very simple point, wherever, if there's a lake, particularly a lake, and it's particularly clear when the lake is very peaceful, there's no wind, and you've got some tree standing right on the banks of the lake, and so there's the tree, normal tree, branches up, roots down, but then when you look at the reflection in the water, there's the same tree, you could say, at least it's the reflection, but again, as we've mentioned, the roots are up, the branches are down, because it's a reflection. So, the point is that this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. Basically, all the features in the spiritual world are there, just as in a reflection of a tree in a lake. Every twig, everything is there. But there's a very important problem. It's all upside down. It's all upside down. Oh my gosh. In other words, it's a crazy situation. It's a crazy situation. Let's just have a look again at the verse. Yeah, so again, it's a point which is not really mentioned directly, but in this 4th paragraph, same paragraph, then Prabhupada mentions that this reflection of the spiritual world is situated on desire. Yeah. Desire is the cause of things being situated in whatever position, actually, in terms of being situated in the reflected tree. Your perverted desires are the root of why you're situated in a particular position in the perverted tree or in material life. And in terms of the real tree, the roots of the tree are desire. The roots of the reflected tree are our material desires, and the roots of someone's being situated in the real tree in some position or another position. There are different positions in the spiritual world. So the root, again, is their desire, but their Krishna conscious desire, desiring to serve Krishna as a friend, as a parent, a conjugal lover. These are different spiritual desires. Yes, so Prabhupada then concludes the paragraph. One who wants to get out of this material existence must know this tree thoroughly through analytical study. Then he can cut off his relationship with it. And in the final paragraph, let's have a look here. Well, Prabhupada, yes, we mentioned already, the tree being the reflection of the real tree is an exact replica. That's one reason why it's so hard to get out. Because it's just like the spiritual world, but it's all perverted. People are there, relationships are there, emotions are there, activities are there, love is here in the material world. It's all there from the spiritual world, but it's all perverted. And of course, one point that I think may not be mentioned here, or maybe it is, but I'll mention it anyway, is that in the real tree, what is the highest thing in the real tree, right at the top? It is the love of Radha and Krishna, top of spiritual existence. And in the reflection, what is the bottom thing in the reflection? The perverted attraction of between male and female. Yeah. These are all very interesting and very important points. So, okay, now let's just, Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport. Let me just read a little bit. A reflection is temporary. Where is this now? It's about 2/3 of the way through the last paragraph. A reflection is temporary, for it is sometimes seen and sometimes not seen. But the origin from whence the reflection is reflected is eternal. The material reflection of the real tree has to be cut off. When it is said that a person knows the Vedas, it's assumed that he knows how to cut off attachment to the material world. If one knows that process, he actually knows the Vedas. One who's attracted by the ritualistic formulas of the Vedas is attracted by the beautiful green leaves of the tree. He does not exactly know the purpose of the Vedas. The purpose of the Vedas, as disclosed by the personality of Godhead himself, is to cut down this reflected tree and attain the real tree of the spiritual world. All right, let's move along. Verse 2. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruit of actions of human society. Okay, yeah, so branches, first paragraph, branches are going in all directions, basically. The lower parts we're in the first paragraph of the purport here. The lower parts are humans, Prabhupada says animals, horses, different animals like that. They're in the lower branches. In the higher parts are the demigods and other related species, Gandharvas, Apsaras. Actually, they're generally described as being different types of demigods. And the tree is, of course, nourished by water. It has to be. And what is that water? It's the three modes of material nature. That's stated in the verse. And Prabhupada makes the point, when the modes are really proportionately greater, much stronger, then the species of life are manifested accordingly. So the twigs are the objects of the senses that we read. Prabhupada says, by development of the different modes of nature, we develop different senses. And by the senses, we enjoy different varieties of sense objects. Then a little further down in the second paragraph, Prabhupada says, the twigs are sound, form, touch, and so on, the sense objects. So the tips of the branches are the senses, the ears, nose, eyes, etc. The secondary roots are attachments and aversions, which are byproducts of different types of suffering and enjoyment. Tendencies towards piety and impiety develop from these. And they're also spread all over in all directions. So the real root, the main root, actually we read in the first verse, is in Brahmaloka. But the other roots, not the main root, but the other roots, are in the human planetary systems. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, after one enjoys the results of virtuous activities in the upper planetary systems, he comes down to this earth and renews his karma or fruitive activities for promotion. This planet of human beings is considered the field of activities. That's interesting, isn't it? Such an important place. Where you're going to go to is determined when you're on this level. The human level, the middle planetary systems. So anyway, the idea is that all this knowledge about Prakriti, the three modes, getting out of all of that, it's all based on the Vedas. That hadn't really been mentioned in chapters 13 and 14. But now it's being made clear, that the Vedas are our source of information. It's one thing to say, well, Krishna says, and of course that's valid, but it's also very important, the Vedic confirmations. So verses 3 and 4 are together. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, and this is now very important, thereafter one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns. And there, what do you do there? Surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. So, there's a famous saying, can't see the forest for the trees. I think we're all familiar with that saying. When you're in a forest, you can just get lost because there's so many trees and you can't see far at all. You can just see through a few of the trees and then it's blank. You can't see any further. If you're up higher, like in a plane or something like that, then you can see the extent of the forest, the different features like that. So yeah, this is the point. First point is that when you're entangled in material life, you can't understand your position. Yeah, you need Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, it'll just be too confusing. So, and Prabhupada in the first paragraph explains that the origin of the tree is Krishna. Yeah. And when you've found Krishna, then that's the end. You don't need to do any more searching. Yes. And how are we going to find Krishna? How are we going to find Krishna? Prabhupada says, we're still in the first paragraph. One has to search out that origin of this tree, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, through the association of persons who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. Then, with that understanding and becoming absorbed in devotional service to the Lord, then that detachment will arise, and then you can cut down that tree of illusion. Yes. Well, so that was the first paragraph. No, we're in the second. Oh, well, we just entered. No, we've been in the first paragraph. Now we're getting into the second paragraph. And here Prabhupada again is emphasizing association, discussion based on authoritative scriptures. One must hear from persons who are actually in knowledge. This is sort of like the formula for making this progress. As a result, there's a second paragraph, as a result of such discussion in the association of devotees, one comes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then what? What do you do then? Then the first thing one must do is surrender to him. Become a devotee. Yes, so this is really now a real focus on this type of subject. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore, to get out of the entanglement of the strong banyan tree of material life, one must surrender to Krishna. As soon as one surrenders unto Krishna, one becomes detached automatically from this material extension. So we read, Prabhupada said, there are these two things: detachment from the material world, attachment to Krishna. First of all, attachment to Krishna comes. Then the detachment from other things follows, because being really nicely connected with Krishna, you see very clearly how everything else is very pale and insubstantial, and it's just not got what we need. Okay, now verse 5. Again, it's very nice, important. Those who are free from false prestige, illusion and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. So these different qualities are mentioned: free from false prestige, illusion, false association, no more lust, free from duality. So these are important, nice things. But really the key is you have to learn how to surrender unto the Supreme Lord. Right, so Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada begins by saying the surrendering process is described here very nicely. And then he goes into the discussion about those different qualities. Humility. Conditioned souls are very puffed up, so they can't surrender. So humility needs to be there. And how are you going to get that humility? By cultivating real knowledge. Then you'll understand, oh yeah, I'm not some big important person. Actually, I'm a bit of a silly fool for getting confused by this material world. Yes. And it's interesting, Prabhupada basically dedicates the majority of the purport to this point about not being proud, about being humble. Yeah. One has to get out of this false notion that human society is the proprietor of this world. Then when you get free from that, then you can give up false association. Because that false association binds you to this world. You have to understand what is yours and what isn't. And how are you going to do that? Well, you've got to understand Krishna. It's not just that nothing belongs to me and that's it. Nothing belongs to me because everything belongs to Krishna. And Krishna, therefore, is extremely important. And compared to him, I'm just a pathetic useless. Yeah. So anyway, people the whole world is moving under this illusion that we are special. Humans are special. They have the right to dominate this world. So Prabhupada concludes the purport, and when one has an understanding of things as they are, he becomes free from all dual conceptions, such as happiness and distress, pleasure and pain. He becomes full in knowledge. Then it's possible for him to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, okay, starting with the next verse 6, basically the rest of the chapter is discussing Purushottam Yoga, the yoga of the Supreme Person. Of course, we've got the 3 other sections, but they're all just more or less in different ways looking at the process of the yoga of the Supreme Person from different perspectives. So we will carry on Monday. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.